Welcome to our channel. It's truly one of the most frustrating and high-stakes mysteries in botanical cultivation today. Imagine you walk into your drying room, fully expecting to be greeted by the intoxicating, complex terpenes of your perfectly grown boutique plants. But instead, you're hit with a tragic and overwhelmingly dull scent. It's that unmistakable, deeply disappointing aroma of dry alfalfa or old grass. This dreaded boutique hay smell can suddenly take over during the drying process, completely replacing the unique, pungent aromas you worked so incredibly hard to cultivate out in the field.
This botanical aroma mystery is something we've all witnessed at some point, and the heartbreak of this harvest loss is profound. It's a highly prevalent issue that routinely ruins months of flawless cultivation and strict environmental management. You can start with the most pristine, top-tier genetics on the market. You can meticulously dial in your substrate dynamics, perfectly balancing aeration and moisture for your greenhouse, and maintain absolute perfect root health throughout the entire vegetative and flowering cycles. Yet, despite executing every step perfectly, you can still end up with a final product that entirely lacks the vibrant sensory profile you dedicated your entire season to achieving. So, you really have to ask yourself, why do perfectly grown plants end up smelling like dried hay? The underlying biological mechanics point directly to the rapid evaporation of extremely fragile chemical compounds. These aromatic molecules are highly susceptible to volatilization from heat, light, and oxygen exposure. There's a dark, dry humor in the fact that months of careful watering, feeding, and pruning can literally evaporate into the air in a matter of just 48 hours inside a drying room. While it's tempting to blame simple errors in temperature or airflow, the true culprit is a complex interplay of rapid atmospheric changes and specific, highly vulnerable secondary metabolites, leaving us to wonder how we can possibly halt this degradation without compromising the cure.
To unravel this devastating loss, we have to look closely at a highly specific class of secondary metabolites known as volatile sulfur compounds, or thiols. These compounds are driven by complex sulfur amino acid pathways inside the plant, and they are incredibly elusive. In fact, they are so elusive that they remain completely invisible to standard GCFID testing, which are the very same routine lab assays we rely on for compliance and standard terpene profiling. These thiols are incredibly potent even at microscopic trace concentrations, giving certain cultivars their distinctively sharp, skunky, or garlicky aromas. The problem is, when ambient humidity drops too rapidly post-harvest, it quickly strips these invisible, volatile compounds directly from the inflorescence, leaving absolutely nothing but dull plant matter behind. To truly understand this, we need to examine trichome mechanics and volatiles. The physical vulnerability of these compounds is tied directly to exactly where they are stored on the plant. We have to explore the microscopic glandular structures, which are the specialized biological resin factories where these delicate terpenes and thiols actually reside. Understanding this structural vulnerability is absolutely critical for outdoor and greenhouse cultivators who are constantly dealing with elemental exposure, wind, and temperature fluctuations. Out in those dynamic environments, the microscopic architecture of the plant is its first and only real line of defense. We know that modern boutique genetics have been heavily and selectively bred for extreme resin production, packing up to 120 capitate stalked trichomes per square millimeter right onto the calyx surfaces. However, this high density alone absolutely cannot prevent aroma degradation if the internal lipid composition of the resin is flawed. In practice, this means that highly visual, heavily frosted plants can be incredibly deceiving to the naked eye. A flower might look completely coated in brilliant white resin, but if the internal lipid structure lacks the right biochemical balance to hold on to those volatile sulfur compounds, it is highly susceptible to losing its most valuable aromatic profiles the very moment it is harvested. Now, this physical integrity is heavily dictated by the plant's head-to-stalk ratio and its cuticular waxes. A large glandular head sitting on a short, robust stalk yields beautifully simply because more of the trichome mass is extractable resin rather than structural cellulose. However, when cultivars produce high cuticular wax content, it creates a highly viscous, dense resin. You might naturally think this thick, waxy barrier protects the plant, but it actually fails spectacularly post-harvest. This dense layer requires higher temperatures to mobilize during extraction, which ironically increases the risk of terpene loss. Furthermore, as the harvested plant dies and begins to dry, this waxy layer shrinks and cracks, instantly exposing the fragile inner thiols to ambient oxygen and rapid degradation. To really wrap your head around this microscopic fragility, let's consider the physical scale we are dealing with. The volume of a standard 150 micrometer, or 0.006-inch capitate trichome, has a microscopic volume of just 0.00177 cubic millimeters, or roughly 1.08 times 10 to the negative 7th cubic inches. This is vastly larger than the smaller sessile trichomes found closer to the leaf surface, and it underscores exactly why these prominent, spherical, balloon-like structures are so deeply vulnerable. They sit high off the surface, fully exposed to physical rupture, bruising, and subsequent oxidation during harvesting, trimming, and even the absolute gentlest handling by a cultivator. This perfectly introduces what we can call the sterile soil paradox. Beyond the physical structure of the trichome itself, we must deeply question the very cultivation environments modern growers rely on. There's a pervasive modern push for perfectly sterile indoor environments, utilizing synthetic inert media and heavy chemical sanitation. But we really have to ask if this obsessive biological sterility is actually the root cause of the hay smell paradox. By meticulously removing all microbial life, are we unknowingly stripping the plant of the natural tools it originally evolved to preserve its own secondary metabolites out in the field? It's finally time to debunk the persistent myth that heavily sterilized monoterpene-dominant indoor cultivation worms are biologically superior. When we contrast these sterile environments against the diverse, epiphytic microbiome of natural outdoor landraces, a stark biological reality emerges. Sterile indoor plants completely lack the symbiotic microbial webs naturally found in the wild, leaving them biochemically isolated. Because they lack this living microscopic shield, they are entirely unable to naturally lock in volatile compounds during the stressful post-harvest phase. It's a surprising but well-documented fact that wild landraces, baking in the hot sun and open elements, can actually retain their pungent, complex smells much longer than pampered, sterile indoor plants sitting in completely dark, climate-controlled drying rooms. As the agricultural sciences continually remind us, true botanical vitality doesn't come from a sterile clean room. It stems from a healthy, dynamic ecosystem where diverse microorganisms, organic matter, and plants interact to create a self-sustaining environment. Please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel a lot. Now that we understand the critical missing link of the microbiome, we can focus on cultivating lactic acid bacteria, revealing a highly effective, practical, and entirely gear-free fix. You don't need expensive commercial equipment or nitrogen-flushed curing chambers. By actively harnessing specific beneficial microbes, we can biologically lock in those fragile volatile compounds, armor the trichomes, and completely prevent the dreaded hay smell from ever taking over our harvest. The secret to this biological armor lies in lactic acid bacteria, or LAB. These are soil-borne, facultative anaerobic microbes that naturally metabolize simple sugars into powerful organic acids. In a healthy living soil web, LAB operate highly efficiently at a depth of 15 centimeters or about 6 inches deep in the substrate. Down there, they act as an active biological engine, accelerating the decomposition of organic matter, radically improving nutrient cycling, and actively suppressing pathogens. But crucially, they don't just stay hidden in the soil. They naturally migrate and colonize the leaf surface, forming a dense, protective biological layer over the phyllosphere that acts as a literal living shield for your trichomes.
You can actually harness this biological power by making a homemade lactoserum inoculant right in your own workspace. Here is the protocol. You begin by mixing exactly 350 grams, or 12.3 ounces, of rice with 250 milliliters, or 8.5 fluid ounces of chlorine-free water. You let this ferment in a dark space until it releases a slightly sweet, sour aroma. Then, strain the liquid and add 1 liter, or about 33.8 fluid ounces, of organic milk. You must keep this mixture precisely between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius, or 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. After a few days, the science takes over, and it will separate into 3 distinct layers. To extract the highly valuable middle, yellowish lactoserum layer, simply use a clean turkey baster or a small siphon to carefully draw out the liquid, which is now teeming with billions of living microbes.
The biological mechanism driving why this works so incredibly well centers around a vital substance called hexanoate. Hexanoate is a short-chain fatty acid produced when these lactic acid bacteria metabolize simple sugars. Think of hexanoate as the ultimate biological raw building block. When it's introduced to the plant ecosystem, the plant actively utilizes this hexanoate as a direct chemical precursor. The plant's biological resin factories take this raw material and use it to construct heavier, much more stable, complex cannabinoids and terpenes, which radically boosts its overall concentration of active, highly aromatic secondary metabolites. We can actually take this post-harvest fermentation science far beyond living soil health in the greenhouse. We can transition these beneficial microbial mechanics directly into the post-harvest environment itself, actively utilizing them as a dynamic bioprocessing tool during the exact crucial curing phase where those elusive volatile aromas are traditionally lost forever. You execute this post-harvest microbial application by misting your freshly harvested flowers with a diluted lactoserum inoculant, specifically using an ultra-low-volume electrostatic mist. This step requires absolute precision, which is exactly why regular hand sprayers or heavy foggers completely fail here. The large water droplets from standard sprayers will violently rupture those fragile trichomes we analyzed earlier, immediately causing oxidation and massive terpene loss. However, an ultra-low-volume electrostatic mist gently and perfectly coats the phyllosphere uniformly without saturating the plant material. This gentle application creates a dynamic solid-state bioprocessing medium right on the surface of the flower. By utilizing controlled anaerobic fermentation and creating a highly acidic environment, it powerfully suppresses spoilage pathogens. Most importantly, it biologically locks in those elusive volatile sulfur compounds, synthesizing entirely new classes of aromatic profiles and restoring vintage terpene expressions that would otherwise just evaporate into the room. If you want the full, uncut data and this week's newest plant science papers, head over to the members area. You can tap into the entire Cannabis Science Brain Vault for just 99 cents a month. We are entering a fascinating new era, where the future of agricultural production lies not solely in chasing the next big genetic breeding breakthrough, but in deeply mastering post-harvest microbial science and solid-state bioprocess engineering. It leaves us to wonder, if we have been endlessly obsessing over genetics and sterile rooms for decades, what other immense untapped potential is currently hiding right now in the invisible microbiome of our drying rooms?
Thanks for watching.
This content does not constitute medical advice, legal advice, or recommendations for the use, self-treatment, or consumption of any substance.